Hello, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think I start, because we're already past 10 a.m. Yeah, firstly, my name is SK Wong. I'm the country managing partner of ERM in Malaysia and Brunei. And thank you so much for your time here this morning. We're going to spend 2 hours together on a very interesting subject called transition finance. Yeah, and we don't have a lot of slides. We only have 60 slides for over 2 hours. I think we can cover them. But I think more importantly is like we want your participation. Because you invest 2 hours of your time here this morning, we want to make sure you get something back, right, for this 2 hours of investing your time. Yeah. So I really hope that you can actually participate in some of the Menti. We also have quite a lot of Menti questions put into the deck, as well as also like we actually split. Maybe I very quickly go through the agenda first. Let me try. Is it working? Yeah. So we have agenda for breakdown to actually like I would say 4 sessions. I do a very brief introduction, and then like we will go straight into the topic called the responsibility of hard to abate sectors, right? And then after each of this session, we will have a key takeaways. We want you to actually embed some of the learning or some sharing we have done, and then like we have a sort of toilet break and coffee break, and then we go to the next 2 sessions, which is technology and approach, and also on transition finance levers and practices, right? So this is how we're going to spend the 2 hours together. Is it okay with everyone? Yeah. All right, let me start. Yeah. The pointers is not, yeah. All right, so allow me to very quickly introduce ERM for those of you who have not heard us before. So we are the world's largest specialist systemic consulting company, end-to-end. So globally, we have about 8,000 consultants, of which 70 are based in KL office. And we are spread out in 150 offices globally. Our HQ is in London, our CEO is in New York. So we are quite global in that sense, right? So those dots are all the offices we have globally. And we have a very clear purpose. ERM, we have a very clear purpose, is to shape the world, a systemic future with the world-leading organizations. And how do we do that? So I would say like we split our consulting work to 2 components. The first one what we call is the foundation consulting work. It's really do a lot of the work on the field. So I have a lot of like my consultant in the care office, like 30 of them are engineers. The objective is to protect people and planet. So we do a lot of safety work, a lot of like tanker safety, safety culture transformations work, right? When people build a plant, how to ensure that actually help to protect people. What if there's fire? What if there's explosion? So we help to protect people, right? The second is actually on like a lot of the impact assessment work. We also do a lot of like work for data center, right? On contamination of land, on like community engagements and so on, right? I'm very proud to say we have 3 marine biologists in our office. So we also know coral. We do a lot of study on coral, the health of coral, for all the oil and gas rig undersea, subsea pipeline and so on. We do a lot of those work. And I say with those work, we understand the climate science, we do understand the environmental science, and that's where we bring to the next phase of work, which is advisory. That's what we call the boots to boardroom approach. So with the knowledge of the climate and also the environment, we provide advisory services to our client as well. This is going to the C-suite, the board, and office work. But I would say 70% of work and 70% of revenue actually coming from the field work we do. A lot of my colleagues, as we speak now, they're actually at the field and not in office. Yeah? So that's what's ERM. And I'm also very proud to say, besides consulting work, we have our ERM Systemic Institute. So if you type in the word www.systemic.com, you go straight to our think tank. It's the ERM Systemic Institute. We publish a lot of thought pieces. Every year we publish between 35 to 40 thought pieces about certain subjects. For example, right, like here I'd like to highlight the annual trends report, which I'm going to share a bit more details later on. And like we talk about the IFRS S1, S2. In Malaysia, probably heard about the National Systemic Reporting Framework, which was launched last September. We already have a thought thought pieces last February, say all these mandatory reportings are coming. Yeah? So feel free to use these resources. It's free for everyone. You want to like beef up your knowledge on any subject related to sustainability, kindly use our website, right? thesustainability.com. And besides that, for those of you who like to listen to podcasts, we also have a podcast called Sustainable Connections, right? Again, this you can actually connect. And every month we publish a subject. And normally what we do it is like between the ERM subject matter expert, also we bring in the real practitioner, the corporations. And with that, we want to actually have a bit more applicability of some of the theory to practice, right? So please use those available resources, and it's free for all, yeah? Yeah, enough of advertisement. So like first question to you, right? So in your opinion, what is the most important climate-related impacts on your business or to you personally? I'm mindful not all of you are actually in business. So like what I'd like to actually open up the Menti, right, for you to type in some keywords to start, to warm up for all of you first, right? Please feel free to join. Yes, can we have the slide back so you all can scan and actually take the Menti, right? So please type in the keywords. What is the climate question that actually most concerning you or your organizations? Yep. Nice word, risk. Finance emissions. Carbon tax. Business continuity. Loss in productivity. Cost, use of funds. Okay. Yeah, maybe we pause here. Yeah, maybe pause here, right? So if I look at the word cloud, the one really appealing here is the business continuity, right? People are really worried about whether your business is sustainable in the long term, right? And some of the risks involved, carbon emissions. I think all this we will actually talk a little bit today, right? Over these 2 hours. We'll actually do a bit of sharing about all this topic, yeah? Thank you so much for your participation. Let me move on. I'm so sorry, this one is not working very well. Let me try again. Next slide. All right. So I would like to actually start by actually looking at the climate change. I know this may not be your top subject on your mind at the moment because tariff, because of the challenges in the stock market over the last few days, right? Because of the geopolitical environment that we are in, right? But I want to actually bring us back to the reality, right? In terms of like climate change. This is not a distant threat, right? It's happening now, right? I just like to, share some example here. Can I have back the last slide? Sorry. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So like wildfire, flooding, emission or pollutions, right? And someone put it, there's actually costing globally by country on the local environment a lot of money, right? And this is real, right? Like I think like just to quote some example here, wildfire costs US about $400 to $900 billion a year, approximately, right? Flooding costs 30 billion in Asia alone, right? Every year. And global emissions, right? A lot of emissions. And it costs approximately 12% of GDP for every degree of temperature rise globally, right? So that is a big impact on the global economy, right? And also like in terms of the health of the pollution cost is 8.1 trillion or 6.1% global GDP, right? So this is a really costly subject, and how do we ensure planet is still healthy for us and the next generations, right? Sorry? Well, actually, I get a lot of questions about that, to be honest, right? I think when we look at the sustainability topic, right, we see it as a mega decade trends. Personally, I don't believe sustainability is going to be out of fashions by 2040, 2050. Long live after Trump. Trump or other interesting character, politician, will be in and out. But all this, the health of the planet and how we make it sustainable for future generations is in our hands, right? It's long living. I mean, I would think we will long live after Trump. Yeah. So this is, I'm very proud to share this, right? Every year, ERM actually publish what we call the key sustainability trend reports. And this is our 18th editions, the 18 years we published the report. And these are the 10 top key sustainability trends globally, right? The first is climate change and low carbon transitions. Second is valuing human capital. Third is integrating ESG, right? ESG have to make business sense, not only sustainability sense. Fourth is safeguarding nature system. I think over the last 2 days in the summit, we also talked the connection between climate and nature and biodiversity is two sides of the coin, right? And then we look at like streamlining sustainability disclosure is become more and more important for corporations. And building sustainable and resilient supply chain, right? Especially in these current geopolitical situations, right? How you build a sustainable supply chain. And enabling sustainable consumption and production. And we know we consume a lot, but we also want to encourage everyone to consume responsibly, right? And applying technology to sustainability, right? There's a lot of technology, like, just want to quote an example. There's a lot of, like, you're probably aware that there's a lot of, like, carbon project being molded, but, like, there's a lot of also, like, using, like, satellite imagery. We're using a lot of drone, right? Those are technology where you can actually apply to the real environment and respecting fundamental rights. We also get more asks from our clients to look at human rights, labor rights, foreign workers' rights, right? And also like navigating and the evolving political landscape, and we can't ignore that, right? We are living in a reality world. There's a lot of geopolitical challenges we need to navigate through, right, for organizations. That's why just I see like the business continuity and the risk, these are top in your minds, right? And when I want to round up this is I say climate change and low carbon transitions have been featured prominently as one of the key trends for many years. Yep. And this is the topic of our discussion this morning. Oh. Yeah. So like climate change and low carbon transitions, right? I just want to look at some of the key accelerator, right? The JG emission records put global warming on a 3.1%. I think we passed the 1.5 degrees. But doesn't that mean that we cannot U-turn back, yeah? So if we make the world healthier, the planet healthier, we can still U-turn. Because like gradually, hopefully, we will actually emit less carbon. And this is one of the topic of today as well, right? How do you actually transition to a lower carbon economy, right? And renewable energy investment are surging. Last year alone, China add additional 370 gigawatts of power, renewable power, right, to their grid, just alone, China. Globally, RE actually added about 650 gigawatts. 650 gigawatts, yeah? And like COP27, clinch deal on transition finance, noted it's a lukewarm. Is it a good, is it enough? We didn't achieve the trillion, but 300 billion, is it good? But certainly it's a good starting point on the journey, right? Still many country climate pledge fall short of net zero. That's a challenge. And country are adopting carbon pricing, material climate disclosure, and taxonomy. So these are all coming. What we're seeing is like, there will be a price to carbon, right? We are living in Malaysia, right? I don't know whether I should say proud or sad to say that our fuel are subsidized. Both our petrol, our electricity. But that gradually have to go away, because if not, it actually send the wrong signal, right? That means it's like we are subsidizing to burn more carbon, right? And the mandatory climate disclosure and reporting are becoming more important, right? Not only for big corporations, and I think yesterday I was chat with SSM, even on the smaller company, right? So those are gradually becoming, because I think the objective is not just for disclosure, right? It's for the resilience of your business in the longer term. And what are some of the response? Like for corporations, companies start to embrace climate transition plan, right? And because these are real, and that people are becoming more serious about how do I transition to a lower carbon future, yeah? Second is like surging power demand, right? With AI, with more data center being built globally, right? The use of energy are not going to reduce, potentially going to continue to increase, right? So is it an opportunity, or is it an ongoing challenge for planet Earth, right? And for the financial response, right? The first is like we see, let me put up both together, aligning own financing decision with net zero, right? So like the financing decision, I think for banks, insurance, investors, one of the key concerns are try to avoid stranded asset, right? The second is providing transition finance to execute decarbonization project for the hard to abate sectors. Even for the power sector alone, right? Let's say in Malaysia, right? In the infrastructure for beside more RE, we also need to put a lot of effort in terms of the transmission and distribution line. Because the load take more RE, right? Because the surge and up and down are different from the normal base load. Yeah. So I'll end the intro on this slide to say financing the future, the urgent need for transition finance, why this is so urgent and why this is so important, right? The transition low carbon economy requires trillions of investment, right? It's a lot of money, right? Can we afford it, right? And how do we, step by step, make the right call? And how we mobilize, allocate capital today will determine the planet future, right? Always have a role to play here, right? Because like, it's not only us, also our future generation. We want to leave a healthier planet, certainly for myself, to my son, my grandchildren, and children to come, hopefully. Yeah? So those are the things that we are talk about today, right? So I end here to look, just share a little bit of the big picture. And now I will actually pass the floor to Yulia. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SK. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear and see me okay. So my name is Yulia Dobrolyubova. I'm a partner at IRM, based in Bangkok, and I look after corporate sustainability and climate change services, and also a team of IRM across Asia. I actually spend quite a lot of time in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and other ASEAN countries as part of my job. Unfortunately, today I couldn't be present in person, but I hope to see all of you sometime next time. All right. Before we go into the next discussion and the responsibility of hard-to-abate sectors in the low-carbon transition, we have prepared a couple of questions for you to seek your understanding and views. What do you consider as hard-to-abate sectors and transition finance before we explain the connections? So the first question, please use Menti, the same code as SK already presented to you, to provide your views. It could be a couple of words or more, what you consider as hard-to-abate sectors and why. And if you have never heard this word, it's also okay. You can also provide an honest response. Hopefully today's session will explain this more. Okay, aviation, plantation, oil and gas, coal energy, limited technology. Okay, I can see a combination of responses towards different sectors, as well as what constitutes hard-to-abate. Interesting. But many of you mentioned, to a certain degree, fossil fuels, oil and gas, coal, and anything related to this. And given that we are in Malaysia, a lot of responses are also around agriculture and plantation, which is natural. All right, thank you very much. We will uncover that later in our slides. And let's move to the next question. What do you consider as transition finance in your view? And again, there is no right or wrong. We will talk about this shortly. Financing in low carbon solutions, transmission, funding, push for people to go green, financing for green initiatives, financing to transition, emission, financing to assist in low carbon projects, sustainable solutions. All right, quite a few different opinions there. Very interesting. And I'm happy that we're having this session today to explain to you more transition finance because I actually don't see that many right answers. Even though I said there is no right or wrong, even on the right side, there are quite a few different opinions there. All right, let's move on to the first slide. And we're trying to present to you the most common definitions of transition finance. But before doing so, I should admit that globally, there are quite a lot of different frameworks and definitions and approaches to explain what transition finance is. However, most often they all align in a few important principles. Okay, let's wait for the slide to go live. The first principle would be that, of course, we understand that to achieve the Paris Agreement goals of limiting the global temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, the global economy needs to transition to a low carbon pathway. And we need to achieve net zero emissions as soon as possible, but no later than 2050. So this is a very important underlying principle of transition finance. At the same time, transition finance is also meant to support dynamic process of becoming sustainable and low carbon, unlike green finance. So green finance is not the same as transition finance, and that's a very important definition that we will talk about today a lot. Then transition finance, of course, supports the entire economy transition away from fossil fuels. That's the biggest underlying principle. However, at the same time, it's understood that the most difficult sectors to transition away from fossil fuels will be so-called hard-to-abate industries. We will again explain this very shortly, but the main idea here is that there are industries out there that are high emission and contribute a lot to climate change, but at the same time, within these sectors, it is very hard for financial or technological reasons to shift away from fossil fuels immediately and to achieve very sharp reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And these sectors really need additional support because not all measures that we could apply today could be considered green. And that's where transition finance could help us. And the last but not the least underlying principle of transition finance is that it could be provided only if a company has a very clear climate transition plan. And this is a very important prerequisite, which we again unwrap for you today. These are the concepts that are taken from the OECD guidance on transition finance, which was developed back in 2022. On the next slide, you will see another approach, which was developed by ASEAN, closer to our home and our countries. And it is pretty much based on a lot of different international frameworks, including OECD, but also International Capital Market Association definition of transition finance. And you can see here also quite a few overlapping concepts. First of all, transition finance is to support the economy-wide transition, and especially in the developing countries that still depend a lot on fossil fuels. As Kay already gave example of Malaysia, but in fact other ASEAN markets, including Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, all depend on fossil fuels, transition away from those at different paces depending on national circumstances and locally adopted nationally determined contributions. Another important principle here, when we talk about economy-wide transition, it also needs to take into account other sustainability aspects. It's not just about climate, even though climate, of course, is in the focus, but also has to bear in mind other environmental and social concerns, and making sure that we do no harm to the environment and the society while supporting this economy-wide transition. And that's where this whole concept of just transition actually has appeared to support this transition in a just manner. The next two definitions are about transition of specific sectors. Climate transition is a little bit broader. Please stay on this slide. Don't move yet. Thank you. So climate transition is a little bit broader. It speaks about supporting all days because they contribute the most to the global greenhouse gas emissions. But the last one is very much overlapping with the OECD definition as well, that the focus needs to be hard to abate sectors transition and supporting them first and foremost to accelerate their greenhouse gas emission reduction, again, in a just manner. All right, next slide, please, now. And let's now talk about hard-to-abate sectors. You all provided a lot of different answers. So this is a definition by the World Economic Forum and what they consider as hard-to-abate. Essentially, these are the sectors where, due to different technological, financial, and other political reasons, reducing their carbon footprint currently and to move sharply to the net zero pathway is not possible, pretty much because the ways these sectors operate, they still depend on fossil fuels and there are no alternatives at affordable cost available at the moment. And examples of such sectors include, of course, oil and gas, chemicals, production of metals like aluminium, steel, as well as, of course, aviation and shipping. However, in other markets, exist other definitions of what is hard-to-abate. In Malaysia, it's not uncommon to see that construction, palm oil sector are indeed attributed to hard-to-abate, and that's pretty much true. Also, mining sector often is considered as hard-to-abate, which would be particularly relevant for markets like Indonesia, for example. And as you can see here on this slide, altogether, even if we don't take into account, as on this slide, construction, palm oil, etc., these sectors, as defined by the World Economic Forum, contribute 40% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why they're so important for the global low carbon transition. And that's why they need more attention, more support, because it's so hard to get them there. Next slide, please. All right, this is just an evidence how hard it is to transition those sectors away from the current ways they're operating and current business models. As you can see, compared to the compared to pre-COVID times since 2019, these sectors have achieved already some greenhouse gas emission reductions, thanks mostly to some low-hanging fruit activities like energy efficiency improvements, for example, or where possible, conversion to renewable energy or clean energy sources. But it's not enough, and it's definitely not at the pace we need to get to the net zero towards 2050 pathway. And on the right-hand side, you see some of the typical activities that could be applied in those sectors. And you will see that a lot of them, like, for example, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, hydrogen, are not yet commercially available at scale needed for those sectors, especially in our part of the world. My colleagues, Edmund and Tirapon, will talk more about technical approaches, how to reduce emissions and decarbonize and transition those types of sectors. But generally, you can see that the most typical ones would include things like electrification, and where possible, convert industrial processes from the current technologies using fossil fuels to electrification. But again, that would anticipate that the grid emission factor in your country would be lower, meaning that in the country, you would use less coal, less oil, and more natural gas and renewables, which is not yet the case in Southeast Asia in most cases. Other measures such as energy efficiency, material efficiency, also important, but you can see that they don't contribute that much to the overall decarbonization, and we really need to rely on more what we call transformational measures that are more mid-term and long-term. Lastly, I would also like to highlight the first measure, which is avoided demand. In fact, for these sectors in particular, where we really see that it's so hard to decarbonize them, customers of these products are shifting away from using them. A good example could be aviation, for instance. In markets like the European Union, people really shift from flight to train trips, for example, being conscious about their personal carbon footprints. And this is a measure to reduce emissions in those sectors, be it voluntary taken by these companies to shift away from certain services and products, or actually as the external factor impacting them a lot. And again, we'll talk about this in the next section much more. And this is where the big difference between decarbonization and transition lies. It's not just decarbonizing your current portfolio, current business models and processes. It's really also to shift away from your current business models and current products that you produce to potentially something else that is low carbon and closer to the net zero pathway. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about hard to abate sectors, and we explained what transition finance is. But now, what these sectors and companies operating in these sectors could do to access transition finance, and what financial institutions should do also to provide such finance to the real economy. So this scheme, which is also taken from the OECD guidance on transition finance, is quite illustrative and good because it simply explains what needs to happen. For companies, it's very important to have two important prerequisites, two important things in place. First one in the center would be corporate transition plan, which we'll explain a little bit more in this session. So basically, you need to have a corporate level transition strategy and a detailed action plan, how you as an organization plan to shift to the net zero pathway and as fast as possible for your sector given specific circumstances. And this transition plan needs to actually be based on all these elements presented on the left-hand side, which are sectoral pathways. And in most of the countries, those exist as part of your nationally determined contribution pathways and roadmaps. Also, technology roadmaps, which can be found in such reputable organizations' reports like International Energy Agency, NGFS for the financial sector, etc., etc. The last but not the least element is taxonomy. In fact, this is a very good guidance that has been increasingly introduced in many countries, including in ASEAN, to basically set underlying principles, what is considered green, what is considered transition, and how to define those activities, both for the banks, but also for the corporations. So in your transition plan, basically you need to also identify what kind of activities could be considered green, could be considered transition to get access to respective financial instruments. The last but not the least, a corporation needs to have a corporate sustainability report, including climate disclosure in it, which is increasingly being required by lenders and other stakeholders. In Malaysia, for instance, this is a mandatory requirement for listed companies and for major corporations going forward to have such a sustainability report. And now it's going to be IFRS S2 aligned climate report as well, which could be combined in one. This is how also your lenders and financiers broadly could understand what are your targets, what are your pathways, what are your achievements to date towards those targets, because the finance will be also linked to very specific KPIs and target achievement. Now, on the financial sector side, of course, financial institutions would have different financial instruments that could support green activities or transition activities. But also, what is very important for the financial institutions themselves is to have a similar transition plan for yourself as an organization. And all your financing activities ideally need to be connected to your own transition plan. And also, you need to have very good climate risk and impact assessment due diligence process for your existing portfolio, but also for your new transactions. And the last but not the least, don't forget the importance of the second party opinions for specific transactions, where an independent consultant could come in and also help you define whether this could be considered transition or not and why. And my colleague Andy will talk about this more in his last session of the day. Next slide, please. Great. So this is just an example of the national taxonomy introduced by Malaysia, which is called Climate Change and Principle-Based Taxonomy, or CCPT in short. It's a very logical decision tree, essentially, which helps you understand whether a specific activity could be considered green or transitional. Essentially, every activity that could either lead to greenhouse gas emission reduction or so-called climate change mitigation, or improved resilience to unavoidable climate risks or climate change adaptation, could be considered climate aligned. But then we also need to make sure that our activities do no significant harm to the environment or the society. Example could be, for instance, let's say improvement of processes at the manufacturing facility, which could still potentially lead to some wastewater leakages. And there should be a plan in place if that might happen for remedial measures. Based on that, we can say whether this activity is fully aligned with the CCPT, then it can be marked as green. Whether it's transitional, it's not fully aligned, but it still helps transition this company or this asset to net zero pathway, and it can be called transitioning. All right, next slide, please. This is a very simple example. In fact, it's taken from the ASEAN Transition Finance Guidance, and it's a very good illustration what could be considered green and what could be considered transitional or not at all. And a very important underlying principle is that transition finance could be given either for the whole company, for your overall transition to support your broader climate transition plan and targets, or for very specific asset-specific activities. Let's take this example. This is a power company that wants to decarbonize its operations and pretty much shift away or transition away from fossil fuels to 100% renewables by 2050. A great goal, and they have an accompanying climate transition plan and clear targets, which they disclose in the sustainability report. Therefore, they can get access potentially to the so-called entity-level transition finance, which is the first row. But then they also may have very specific activities in their climate transition plan. For instance, they want to develop new solar farms. These activities are considered green because they're fully in line with net zero pathway, and in most of the taxonomies, including the Malaysia one, they would be considered green. So not applicable for transition finance, but definitely applicable for green finance scheme, which would be also available in most of the market. But then they also have two other activities planned, for instance, to convert their gas-fired power plant to make it more efficient, for instance. And because natural gas is considered a transitionary fuel in ASEAN in most cases, then it could be applicable as an activity to get access to transition finance. And the last very interesting case, they also have coal-fired power plant, which they want to completely dismantle, decommission. And for that, in fact, they also can also go for transition finance and support this activity. Very interestingly, we have a real case of our client, a steel company in Indonesia, which just recently got access to development finance for a very similar transition activity to dismantle blast furnace, to develop something new and low carbon as a technology option for making the green steel at their operations in Indonesia. And this is a real case example where companies in the hard-to-abate sectors, and steel is one of them, of course, could could potentially tap into. Lastly, on this slide, I would like to highlight that definitions of what is considered green, what is considered transition, may vary depending on specific market taxonomy. Let's say in Malaysia, it's already pretty clear, but in some markets, taxonomies either may not exist or may cover only green activities. Same applies to banks or like broadly financial institutions. Actually, definitions of what could be considered green or transitional could vary depending on where this bank is coming from, what are their priorities, etc., etc. However, the good news is that usually banks try to align their transition finance frameworks with the local taxonomies. And again, my colleague Andy will talk more about this in the last session of today. I hope this is clear. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Right. We talked about climate transition plan as the very important prerequisite for companies to get access to transition finance. And in fact, this is especially important for the entity level transition finance, but also even for individual asset specific activities. Even if financing would be provided to a specific project, a typical question from lenders or investors will be whether the company has the corporate level targets and plans, because this specific activity needs to be connected to it. And what's the main difference between a transition plan and a decarbonization plan? First and foremost, transition plan is broader. It definitely includes decarbonization plan and activities, but it also aims to help the company address external transition-related drivers, risks, and opportunities, such as, for example, carbon pricing, including in your market of operation, but also in other markets that are your customer markets. A very good example, very relevant for hard-to-abate sector, would be CBAM in Europe, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Basically a tax that companies exporting products such as steel, aluminium, or cement to the European Union would need to pay if emission factor of their products doesn't correlate with the standards set by Europe. And there are many more examples like this. Avoided demand, which we discussed in one of the previous slides, is another one. So how customers actually are looking for green steel, green cement, et cetera, and how that impacts also your overall business model and the profitability as a business. The last but not the least, which is particularly important for financial institutions, but also for hard-to-abate sectors, real sectors as well, is how through your transition plan, you drive low carbon transition across your value chain and beyond your value chain. For financial institutions, of course, how you help the economy-wide transition through your financing activities, but even for hard-to-abate sectors, how through your products and services, you also help to drive this transition of the market and change consumer preferences, for example. So that's a big difference. And it's very important that your transition plan includes not just decarbonization elements, but also how you could change the overall business model, overall the products and services that you provide to address those related risks, opportunities, and drive the overall market transition. And very importantly, last comment on this slide is that this definition is very much in line with the IFRS 2 or SSB, which will be a dominating framework for climate disclosures for us in Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and other ASEAN markets going forward. All right, next slide, please. According to ERM and our experience, these are the key elements of a successful corporate transition plan, what it needs to have. First of all, targeted transition levers. Again, this is not just decarbonization levers and technologies and practices, it's much more. It's basically new products, new services, related policies, even marketing campaigns, if you want, that could help your company change your business model and adjust it to a low carbon pathway. It has to have a clear implementation roadmap with clear roles and responsibilities, starting from the board, executive team, and down to every which is the governance element, and of course related metrics and targets, because as we said before, whichever finance the financial institution will be providing, they will be asking for related KPIs and targets associated with your transition as a company or for specific project. And the last but not the least, it has to have very clear stakeholder engagement element and also climate disclosure connected to your overall sustainability disclosure, as we discussed before. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration. It's quite detailed, and we will share the slides with you later so you can also look into this in more detail later on. Basically, ERM, together with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, has developed a joint climate transition primer document, basically guidelines for corporations how to develop your climate transition plans, which was published and presented last November ahead of the previous COP, the climate conference. And it takes into account all different frameworks out there and the expectations. The most comprehensive framework for developing climate transition plans has been set by the UK Transition Plan Task Force. It's called TPT in short. And this TPT framework actually provides detailed guidelines on what needs to be inside the plan, what are key action items which are depicted here. For your convenience, our ERM experts also highlighted what is the easier to achieve and what are the hardest action items. And as you can see here, the hardest ones would be related to rethinking your business model. So, of course, do financial planning and develop investment plans for your overall climate transition and engage with your value chain, everything which is outside of your control pretty much, as well as metrics and targets, because, again, for hard-to-abate sectors, there might be some limited guidance unlike some other sectors. Next slide, please. And also, just to simplify this a little bit for you, and this is the concept that has been developed by ERM, what are the key steps for the climate transition planning? First and foremost, you need to understand climate-related risks and opportunities that could impact your low-carbon transition. This is the first phase, which is called Face It. And this is where scenario analysis would be very, very helpful. And in fact, that is also a requirement by regulators in Malaysia to do a scenario analysis-based climate risk and opportunity assessment as the underlying principle for your future transition planning. The next step would be map it. So once you understand the key risk, can you please go back to the previous slide? Thank you very much. So the next step would be map it. Once you understand climate-related risks and opportunities, the hotspot areas so-called, you can then define which areas you want to address, which risks you want to minimize, and which opportunities you want to seize, and how that could be translated into your overall business model, business processes, financial planning, investments, etc., etc. Next is do it. Okay, we have a plan. Sorry, can you please move back to the slide? Thank you. The next step is do it. So that's where we really want to tailor our products and services and integrate this innovation element. I told you already example of the blast furnace dismantling just to develop different production process for green steel. I will show you some more examples on the next slide in a second. But before then, obviously, we need to also integrate a step of shape it, where you want to go beyond just your own operations and talk to your industry association, to your peers, maybe with your value chain, with your financiers, to see how you can actually create a change at scale and beyond, again, your own operations and across the whole value chain. If we talk about all these measures, obviously it would incur costs. And how this cost could be mitigated, you need to convince your customers, you need to talk to your financiers, you need to talk to your suppliers, and that's where the shape it step is very important. And the last but not the least is the continuously improving process. The step connected pretty much says that ideally you need to revisit your plan from time to time and even revisit risk and opportunity assessment step one, because situation changes. Now we have quite distinct picture coming from the US compared to, say, last year. And all these implications would need to be taken into account and adjusted in our climate transition plan from time to time. My last slide, we can move on now, thank you very much, is just to reiterate that climate transition plan is not just good to have, it's now must to have. and actually a requirement of the IFRS 2 for those of you who are listed companies or large companies that would fall under IFRS 2 requirements in your respective market. But it also helps you, in fact, to identify potential opportunity areas and attract additional transition finance or even green finance into your activities. And on the right-hand side, one more click, please. You will see some real examples from our clients. One more click, please. Thank you. And my colleagues, Edmund and Tirapon, will actually explain them a little bit more later, but just as a highlight, three very distinct examples. Oil and gas company operating in this region, medium size, not like one of the largest players. Now they aim to become a diversified energy provider and shifting away from traditional oil more to gas and renewable energy in their portfolio, to the level that they even introduce critical mineral mining as part of their business model and overall business offering. The next example is a coal mining and power company in Indonesia, with the whole phase out coal strategy globally and in Indonesia. They are shifting away from their traditional activities to introduce new critical mineral mining and EV battery manufacturing businesses, essentially with collaboration with one of the online delivery platforms. This is a great example when it's really not about decarbonization, but really about transitioning away from traditional services and products. Another example of that sort, a regional cement company, which we worked, they have offices in Vietnam and Thailand and some other markets. What they did, they decided to establish their own waste management business. I mean, they had some to supply refuse-derived fuel and biomass to co-fire with coal in their kilns, but they decided to establish it as a standalone business to supply waste, not just for their own operations, but to their peers and other businesses in the respective markets. Again, a great example of transition where the company is moving away from just producing cement to some new activities that are considered low carbon. And with that, I will pass it back to SK to run a quick mentor session to conclude this part of our masterclass.
Thanks, Yulia. There's quite a lot of information and sort of concept that are actually introduced by Yulia. Maybe very quickly to the next slides. Right? It's like, what are the key takeaways or reflection after listening to these Yulia sessions? Can you type in some of the keywords, please? Green and transition finance differences. It's good. You understand the difference between green and transition finance. Distinction between green and transition finance. What about the finance insurance gap for those sectors? Okay. How to move forward. Transition planning is essential. You have good corporate transition. Understand the business cases on transition finance. Learn more about the transition. Okay.
Very good. And for your convenience, we also provided links to all the guiding documents, so you can learn more later after the masterclass as well.
Yeah, I'm mindful of time, so we will actually share all the slides with all of you. I'm mindful that some of the might be quite small, the font, you can't read very clearly. But we'll share the slide deck with all of you, right? So I think in summary, what I say is like, for transition finance, is how you actually transition your business to the future low economy, low carbon world, right? In terms of your own business model, in terms of like if you're in hard to abate sectors, how you gradually transition towards the new model, because also there's changes in consumer behavior, right? let's say, for example, if in the ICE car business, the supply chain ICE car, when the public are adopting more to public transport and to EVs, your supply chain will gradually become more challenging, right? So how you transition to the new future, a low carbon world, right? Again, this may be the next 5, 10, 20 years, right? But that is coming. So those are the very important elements for you to consider, right? Thank you. And I think we are about 11 already. Thanks, Yulia. So we have taken up 1 hour of your time. So I'd like to actually call for maybe a quick sort of rest break, toilet break, right? Can you please come back, I think 10 minutes? Good morning again. Are we ready to restart? All right. I know everyone is busy on their phone, so appreciate a bit of attention here. So we are actually going to the next topic now. We talk about technology. So to my colleagues, Tirapon from Bangkok office and also Edmund here, we will share, right? The floor to you, Edmund.
Thanks, SK. If you do not know me, my name is Edmund, based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia office. I've been managing a team here. I've been working with a couple of projects on JG inventory and also decarbonization projects for the last 3 years. I'm practicing that now. So I've been exposed to different technologies and different approaches that I would like to share today with the audience today. Next slide. So we like to break the ice a bit first. We'll go through the Menti. What are the main challenges that your organization is facing in transitioning to a low carbon economy or low carbon pathway? Perhaps you can think on the question that SK mentioned, thinking about EV conversion of ICE vehicle to battery. Right? Profitability, finding good investment, yep. Finance. We have a couple of slides on that in terms of how you would like to make your decarbonization pathway a little bit more attractive for financing. Yep. Scope setting. Yeah, management support. Yep, stakeholder engagement is really critical here. Okay, there's some questions on data, risk of data, lacking of data, getting comfortable with the data that you have now. All right, and yeah. Okay, I think we will just pause here and move to the next slide. So the concept of ICE to EV, so you need to actually appreciate in terms of EV, right? Maybe a raise of hand, who actually owns an EV here? One. You guys are in a very transitional period. I will say you folks will be slightly in trouble because there's a new plug-in hybrid and also EV as well to help extend the range. So basically, it's basically looking at the technological maturity and also market volatility. So we start to see now PHEV are start to come in, and then the EV that you have doesn't give you that range. So you can see the current technology that we have now is very quickly being discontinued and being replaced by new technologies. And however, there are also certain issues as well with the PHEV, whereby you have a cost of maintenance will be a lot more higher. So the market is a bit more volatile. And of course, there's only like one person that raised his hand. So this is really showing you the case of the acceptance of EV in the market. There's a lot higher cost of capital to purchase EV vehicles. And of course, there is a lot of private and also public sector to accept the EVs as well in this region. You need to consider whether the battery allow you to bring you to have the battery range to bring you from one point to another point, especially if you want to go from, say, for your balik kampung or your Hari Raya, you need to make sure that you are able to travel all the way there, right? The next part here, not looking at just EV, you will need to actually look at a wider picture, looking at infrastructure, making sure that you have the right charging station at key areas. Perhaps start off with areas with higher population, looking at targeting areas like KL, Penang, and also Johor. So that are something that the corporation and also the government will need to actually work hand in hand through stakeholder engagement, understand the implementation barriers to help transition the adoption of EV. You can actually, we provided a link here through the UNFCCC as well for you to have a look. Next slide. We start off with transport earlier. Yeah, can click, press a few clicks. So depending on different sectors, right? And there's a question earlier on the steps. So the first step to any assessment, first you need to recognize your main source of emission. So how do you recognize your main source of emission? First, you need to do a GHG inventory, like a stock take exercise of your emission. Understand where's your source of emission first, and then you will be able to then address your emissions appropriately. For instance, like for finance, the source of emission is very surprising that it's not their operation, but basically it's based on their activities. A lot of their activities are related to financing their loans. So hence, their emissions are largely from the finance emission, and hence, to address the emissions is basically looking at their portfolio. While the other sectors, you will need to go through the GHG inventory process to understand whether there is scope 1, your scope 2, and also their scope 3, there are other 15 categories. So you need to do a relevancy test around those 15 categories. What are relevant to you? Organize that in a more pragmatical way, so then you can actually address those emissions. Perhaps looking at where are your highest emission source of your scope 3 categories. That will actually get you started in terms of knowing where you should actually start. Right? Do the stock take exercise covering scope 1 and scope 2. And also we need to be mindful that NSRF has a requirement later on scope 3 as well. So these are some of the considerations that you should start thinking. Next slide. For any credible transition plan, there are actually 4 key ingredients. I mentioned earlier, your stock take exercise. Do a very robust baseline assessment, your GHG inventory. Conduct like a business as usual forecast using international standards that's widely adopted, like GHG inventory for most sectors. There are other specific sectors as well for GHG protocol. And for finance emissions or facilitated emissions for the finance and insurance, look at PCAF. So there are specific guidance documents to help you quantify your GHG inventory appropriately. And then next step, identify what sort of a target that you would like to use for target setting. You may not need to actually subscribe to any of science-based target. Don't do that immediately. You can set a very high goal standard, like science-based target first, for you to evaluate internally, see whether are you able to actually achieve science-based target. So then you can actually develop a plan to bring your organization forward, and then you are not risk of greenwashing or trying to, not disclosing transparently. And there are also specific other targets as well, IEA and also NGFS. Next would be the residual emissions. It is very important. A lot of organizations nowadays looking at offsetting and looking at how to manage that through residual emissions. So I would actually encourage to look at Vera certified or gold standard certified investment before you actually certify projects, be it nature or be it technology removal. Because you will need, before you invest directly, you will need to make sure that the projects that you invest in are credible, are recognized by Vera and gold standard. The last thing that you would like to do is basically you invest in nature-based solution quite heavily, and then there's no organization were willing to buy those credits. And my colleague Andy later will talk a little bit more on that. The fourth step is to how to make your decarbonization plan or your transition plan attractive for finance institution. Especially, we have a couple of insurance and so financial institution sectors here. Basically, sustainability and also relationship manager from banks need to work hand in hand to bring forward a business case for the industry. So then you have a plan to fund the projects for the different industries. So these are the things that industry and also the bank would need to play a part, and including an appropriate advisor to connect some of these dots together and to evaluate what is considered as a transition plan that is attracting financial investment, or that transition plan is an investment grade decarbonization plan, or is a very high level one for internal use that you would like to do a planning, a corporate strategy planning purposes. Next slide. So depending the maturity or your readiness of your organization, if you have set, for some organization that are relatively young and would like to get started, perhaps you start thinking of setting a net zero target or set a target, right? By having some commitment and develop a credible methodology with some clear assumptions to help you establish your emissions baseline. Because once you have established your emissions baseline, you will then able to do like a proper forecast, measure against your baseline to see that reduction. And of course, coming with an action plan, bring different functions within your organization, from your top organization, putting KPIs, metrics, and targets for different departments. That's key. So then they are able to have deliberate action to monitor the progress of your transition. And then you need to have a team around. That's where your sustainability team and also a representative from different functions contribute. If you're a little bit more advanced, you have set a target. So now you need to have a strategy in place. That's where the governance structure, having a vision, mission statement properly developed. If you like to ensure that your framework is sound, perhaps you need to consider climate risk analysis as well to make sure to protect your asset. The commercial plans, to put it simply, that is basically the investment grade decarbonization plan. And then once you have that strategy around you, you will then start to monitor and then manage that through your internal function to see where you are 1 year after. See whether if the original goal, the plan that you started, is it actually sound, or if there's a different element or different discussion or different project that you need to supplement to meet your climate strategy. Those organizations that are a little bit more mature, you might want to think of how you would like to attract your supply chain, your value chain, along your decarbonization. That's where you will start to talk about optimized climate and ESG goods and services portfolio, which I'm going to talk a little bit on that. And I mentioned earlier, once you have the targets and strategy clearly set up, you need to scale your internal capabilities, meaning there will be an impact to your OPEX as well. And my colleague later will talk a little bit on that. CFO would love to see that. Next slide. So very broadly, just to bring your attention, for any decarbonization or any transition plan or any action plan for the matter of fact, right? First, you need to be very clear of your project objective. Do you want to make the product be more competitive? Do you want to navigate the transition? Or do you want to operationalize some of your plan? You have your struggle to implement it. So you need to be very clear on your objective first, on why you wanted to engage or to embark on this ambition. And then understand what's your purpose? Do you want to differentiate your product a little bit better? Or do you have an asset that is about to be stranded? What are those assessments that you need to conduct? So those assessments will be like the marginal abatement cost curve assessment, or for asset decarbonization. If you would like to do product differentiation, there's also a product carbon footprinting as well, just for a specific product line to make your product a little bit more appealing, especially for the EU market or for the US. This is to address the CBAM, because they would like to make sure that the product they produce has properly quantified the emissions. And if you are a little bit more ahead, if your corporation is a little bit more ahead, and you would like to conduct a lot more stewardship sort of like a program, for instance, water, carbon, or even product declaration, that's where the life cycle assessment will come into play to help you along this journey to navigate this transition. So while we are looking at the value creation, the top part is very exciting. The bottom part, we will need to actually appreciate there are also risks as well. For instance, we need to make sure and appreciate in the decarbonization or the transitioning of your assets, there are certain processes you cannot just pivot from one to another. There's a lot of risk to your processes. You need a lot of buy-ins from internal functions to accept that you are actually transitioning from the current processes using fossil fuel to electricity. You will need to also start to appreciate the data. Data are your assets. You need to look at how you would like to protect your data being used, being quantified, and also the technology ecosystem around your corporate setting. Next slide. So, all in all, there are various multiple technology routes and combinations to be adopted for hard-to-abate sectors. There are 5 key ones under the UNFCCC. That's the energy efficiency that we heard all this while. And how do we actually implement this energy management system? It's basically you need to have a thinking on how to perhaps measure your data, have the right data to quantify your GG inventory, having actual data flow of energy, hence those IoTs, those sensors that you're going to install in your operations. And then that inform you where is your largest source of emissions from your processes, and then you'll be able to identify those processes to be, or prioritize those processes to be carbonized or pivot them. Material efficiency, extending lifespan and also reusability of materials, that are also key. Reason is because we are using a lot of materials. For instance, the F&B sector, they use a lot of packaging materials, plastics, Tetra Paks. So you need to make sure that the materials that you use are try to extend their lifespan, because we need to appreciate that the raw material is coming from hydrocarbon. So how do we limit the use of or extract those hydrocarbon is to try to keep those plastics within the economy and try to make it circular. A lot of current materials now are going to landfill, and we need to think about how to actually bring these materials into a recycling economy or a circular economy. Decarbonizing production processes and electrification. I've mentioned earlier already, we need to be very careful. Don't just jump because of trend, because of high adoption or what we hear from the news. We need to do a bit more research and assessment to prioritize what are the process that you need to invest in first, whether those are material, whether those are the highest source of emission. For instance, electrification, everyone is going through electrification, but what do we need to electrify? Perhaps think of industrial heat pumps, temperature-based application, one of the key source that consume a lot of energy. So that is something that you would like to prioritize that first. Circularity, I've touched it a bit in terms of closing the loop for materials and also energy flows. Materials will be limit your extraction of raw materials, the hydrocarbon. That's linked to your plastics and also your material use, and also keep your energy flow circular if that's possible. And throughout this project, right, and what's differentiating between decarbonization to a transition plan is to innovate and rethink your product portfolio throughout your assessment. How then do you shift your product from a traditional product to a greener product while not giving an impression that it's a greenwashing? So you need to make clear in terms of an assessment or the assumptions made, and then you will be able to again get it verified or it's credible. And then for the sustainability team is you will then think about it is a lot more comfortable to actually disclose out because you have a very clear technical assumptions or process in place to help with your decision-making process, to identify what are those products or processes to decarbonize. Next slide. I would like Chang, Tirapon, to come off mute to talk a little bit more on the value sources, as this CFO will actually appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Edmund. So we have ourselves as a consultant, we've received a lot of feedback from our clients that the projects that we work with them need to be more practical, and that they need to show some improvement in terms of the financial performance of the company, not just talking about the environment. And I think through the presentations that we have throughout today, you can see that there's a clear interlinkage between climate change and the financial performance of the company. So here we outline 4 main areas in terms of value sources. So reduction of operational OPEX. So this basically interlinks with improvement of efficiency that Edmund mentioned earlier, as well as optimizing the sources of energy and raw materials that are being used. Enhancing revenue. So this could be in terms of either new revenue sources or enhanced revenue sources. Improve the competitive positioning. So in markets where there's a lot of competition, you will need some differentiations between yourselves and your competitors. So it may not be enough to be attractive financially and from their business point of view, but you may also need to be competitive in other areas such as climate change. And finally, in terms of lower cost of capital, so we are seeing that more of our clients are using green bonds or climate bonds to raise funds for their activities. And those sources of financing may be lower in terms of interest rate and provide a better financial performance for those clients. So we have some case studies here, and we're happy to share on those if you have questions on those as well. So as Edmund mentioned earlier, in terms of the different stages, so you would firstly start in terms of the climate targets, then you would move to looking at your climate risk, and then finally integrating into a business transition. So on the next slide will be the first of a few case studies. In this case study, we've worked with a client called Medco Energy. So we firstly started with their greenhouse gas inventory. That was the very first step that they engaged us with, around 5 years ago. And then around 3 years ago, they said that, our board of directors wants to look at a climate strategy and wants to set the net zero targets. And so currently this is at the second stage, which is around an integrated climate strategy, integrating risk as well. And Medco Energy is an oil and gas company, but they also have power generation. So they are quite flexible in that they are able to expand their renewable energy as well. And they're also thinking of transitioning from their typical oil and gas extraction and using those extraction capabilities to move into more critical mineral mining. And as they see their portfolio shifting, so you can see the steps starting from understanding their greenhouse gas emissions, then transitioning to understand the risks and opportunities. And then from the risks and opportunities, they see that they have these new business segments, which are around renewable energy and mineral mining, to expand their portfolio, to de-risk their portfolio in terms of any climate change, and to have sustainable businesses moving forward. So this is one case study. So I'll pass it back to Edmund for the remaining case studies.
So this one case studies around the cement plant here in Malaysia. So it started off with a very simple decarbonization roadmap project. And then through the implementation of this project, we are able to help the client to differentiate a different product mix into its production. So they found out that a different mix of cement mix will actually bring the value of product, and then that will be able to create a green premium for its cement, and it can be sold as a cement, a green cement. Yeah, so that is quite interesting for them, and then that allows them to actually to continue to remain the current condition of its asset now is quite aging, but they are able to leverage the product now to actually extend its plant life cycle, especially because they need to actually yeah. Next slide. I will basically skip a few. So for finance emissions, basically for finances and also insurance, you need to start to think about your operational emissions, and also more importantly is your facilitated and also your finance emission. That will actually help bring your stakeholders to, and assess your sectors that you are most exposed to, and then you can bring your relationship manager to then engage with different industries for those financing needs. Just gonna skip through. So this is basically, I have a few more slides. So basically the challenge that we observe so far is basically most of the time we have a transition plan, but it's very, very rough. It's very important that we need to set an objective, establish a governance framework first, and then get their buy-in from the top, especially from those have like the CFO that manage the financial KPIs, and making sure that your decarbonization or even transition plan it is an investment grade to attract financial institution, and start small. Don't decarbonize or look at changing or pivot to a different segment quickly. Perhaps think about pilot testing first. It's something very small in terms of your processes. So these are also other challenges as well that I've spoke about earlier, in terms of how do you mobilize the finance to your sectors. So my key takeaway is transitioning. It is very challenging, but throughout the assessment, there are actually opportunities to capture, be it new business segments or extending your asset lifespan. A transformation mindset is very, very important. You need to innovate or think around your product, your current product and processes. Need to not just think and innovate, but you need to have those stakeholder engagement with different functions to bounce off ideas. So then you can come up with an out-of-box thinking, because if you stay working in silo, that's where you'll be limited with the number of opportunities that you have. Hence the stakeholders engagement, be it within your functions from top down, or through your stakeholder engagement to other ecosystem. Leadership from your organization is also key as well, to set the tone in terms of decarbonization or transition finance, especially for the hard to abate sectors. Yeah, I've basically just powered through the slides in terms of the steps. As mentioned by SK earlier, we will share this slide in terms of the steps. Yeah, that's a key takeaway here.
I'm mindful of time, right? Thanks, Edmund. I'm mindful of time. Maybe I think we skip this Menti, if you're okay. Because also I want to actually allocate time for Andy to actually share the finance side, yeah? Andy? Yeah, maybe over to you, yes. We only have another sort of 20 plus minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, good job everyone for staying awake, and I know a lot to cover today. So the last section will be very much focused on how financing plays a role. Obviously, in any conversation, the finance sector is the catalyst. Again, maybe due to the timing, we'll skip the Menti, yeah? So we jump right into the content. So maybe just one step back and to recap some of the pertinent points that Yulia have brought up. I just wanted to paint a picture why this is very important. Obviously, if you see on the top left, you look at the hard to abate sector like coal, and you look at the bottom right, a very renewable solar archetype of what we call green projects, right? The journey from top to bottom on the left, it's not linear, it's not an immediate overnight thing. And consequently, we need to think of it as a journey. And in any transition, the key thing we're looking at is timing, right? How much time do you have, right? And that's why a lot of it is also sometimes beyond our control. Why I say that is in terms of policy, the government has incentives to go green for various reasons. One could be accessibility in remote countries, remote areas of a specific country. A green solar panel or renewable solar panel might be a lot better than transporting coal or building a gas pipeline, for instance. So there are some advantages in terms of access, affordability, and even security. I mean, obviously, as you know, even in times of conflict, oil prices fluctuate. So in a sense, as a country, if you're a net importer, it might hit you. Fortunately, Malaysia is quite blessed. You have a lot of oil, so that's not really an issue. But again, these are very complex scenarios that are quite evolving. But the narrative is there are advantages in transitioning fast at a policy government level. And in fact, there's some rhetoric that came out in last few months. So some of these statements might be familiar to you. I think the first one is one where scientists have come up to say that we are way off the 1.5 degrees. In fact, we are going to 3.1. So that sends a very urgent message that we need to transition fast. The second one is actually a neighboring country. The relative of the president or the previous president actually said that they would actually phase out coal very quickly. But then when the new president take over, his relative said actually that is a misunderstanding. If we do that, then we are going to generate economic suicide. So you see a bit of like various conflicting agendas that they need to manage. Yeah. Because if you transit too fast also, then what happened to all the jobs, right? What happened to all the classical financial revenues that you're getting at the country level? So it's very complex. And obviously the last two statements, I'm sure everyone knows, some are associated with the president of the US. And in fact, just this week, he said, 2nd April is a day to be remembered. So what is the one word that marks this important day? Tariffs, right? So you see this tariff thing also is complex because if you look at it positively, if let's say the tariffs are targeted at, let's say, China, and China is a big renewable supplier of green infrastructure, right? So what that could mean is actually maybe an opportunity. That could mean they could divert their exports more to Southeast Asia. Then in that sense, we are getting perhaps cheaper renewable supply of these critical minerals or critical infrastructure, right? So actually, we have to take things a bit broader when we talk about transition. There are a lot of competing forces. Malaysia itself has made commitments how it wants to get to 2050 and the various goals associated with that. Again, fossil fuels is also articulated as something that the country needs to quickly transit. Yeah. So I think enough of that. I mean, you guys are more familiar than me about the NETR. I'm from Singapore, actually. I haven't introduced myself. Yeah. Yeah. So I think in the interest of time, I'll just quickly speed on. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, Okay. Apologies for the lag. Yep, the context of transition has to be broken down in or can be looked at from a various angles. So Yulia mentioned about the Malaysia CCPT, the Climate Change Principle Taxonomy. That is a principle-based taxonomy where you look at whether in principle and activity qualifies for transition or green definitions based on maybe what harms do they cause to the environment, or whether there are certain sectors that are qualifying. So it's a very high-level principle-based taxonomy. There are other taxonomies like EU taxonomy, and just a year and a half ago, the Singapore taxonomy, they take a more granular approach, looking at the activity, the sector, the timing associated, right? So it's quite granular. How it works basically, if you think of it, is a traffic light concept. So every sector, every associated activity, not say every, but high-level activities, is given a time number, a timing that you need to reach to transition from a red or hard to abate sector to a green, which is a clear. I mean, when you talk about the transition earlier, right, like from the hard to abate to green, right, it's a journey, right? So that is being defined clearly per sector, different milestones from green to red, and what we call the transition traffic light, which is the yellow amber. Okay, so classically, financing is being channeled to either the red sectors, which is what financing has always been prior to the whole sustainability agenda, but now green is very popular now. Last decade, there's a lot of green financing. And now the question is, how do we then encourage the amber financing, i.e. the transition-related financing, right? And if you can see an example of a electricity generation company, I know it's a bit of an eyesight test, but you can see at the row, right, there are years associated. So 2023 to 2030, okay? If you are producing less than 100 carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour, okay, then you qualify for being labeled as a green use of proceeds or a green project. Okay, you go along the same row on the green to the right, you see that number dropping from all the way to 2050, which makes sense, right? Because the green today is not the green tomorrow or green 20 years time. And correspondingly, what's interesting, if you look at red, it's very clear. After 2035, no need to talk about it already. If you're red today, you're red tomorrow, right? You can't be red. You're either more red or you're less red. Don't care. You're just red. Today you're red, it means you're red already. So no need to talk about the other rows, okay? But just in case you think you're halfway amber, right, which I'll talk about later, if you think you're in the gray area, if I may say, then the red also has a reduction pathway. Okay? So again, if you're red today, you can be more red tomorrow in a sense. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is the yellow one, right, is reducing, and after 2035, there's no more numbers ready. You know why is that? Yeah, correct. So you by then you must either be red or green already. You don't need to there's no more transition anymore. Okay? So we are in a get out of jail card free situation. You are in transition now. We are not going to be too religious whether you're green or red. So we give you that leeway, but there are very specific numbers associated. Okay, whether at a metric level or activity level that we'll talk about later. Yeah, maybe with that, maybe I just want to cover on the top, on the left side, right? So the CDP has said a very good statement that every transition plan, regardless of whether it's a corporate level, government level, project level, you have to have time-bound action plans associated with it. So a principal approach might not be sufficient enough, where you say, okay, if you are in principle not doing any significant harm, then you may be yellow or green. You have to go down to that time. And also in the current stock take, right? So in 2015, the Paris Agreement came out. And in 2018, they had this national determined contribution. So every country must submit what they plan to get down to net zero, ideally by 2050. So this is actually a very big systemic move to green. And everyone recognized that there is a transition. And that's why there are intentional stock takes. Like last year was a stock take. In 2020, there have been another stock take. So every country is encouraged to submit where they are in their journey to getting to 2050. Right? So if that macro framework, every government will then have a priority focus sectors or priority activities, and that shapes the whole transition taxonomy. Okay. So again, coming back to the point that this is really all hands on deck. The good thing is there are a lot of guidance available, whether it's at global level, like the GFANZ, the Global Financial Alliance of Net Zero, or even OECD, like we talked about a bit. They have also come up with some levels, some opportunities, some classifications, and some tools to help you get to a transition framework. Yeah. Regionally, there are a lot of taxonomies out there. Even Singapore taxonomy is now called the Singapore Asia taxonomy. So the intent is to allow other countries to embrace this taxonomy as well. And even at corporate level, I mean, you can see both banks coming up with not green financing frameworks, but specific transition financing framework. Okay, so likewise, corporates also have come up with specific transition financing framework. So it's not about the green or the red, it's about the journey, okay, and how we describe the journey on the way to net zero 2050 or 2060. Okay, so the good thing is that there are a lot of guidance, so you're not lost, and obviously you can always approach the ERM team to help you navigate that. Yeah. Okay, again, eyesight test, but not to worry. The right side is taken from the MAS taxonomy, and this is actually the classical approach to loan, so maybe you don't even have to look at the slide. When a financer gives a loan, okay, the loan can be used, or the loan can be categorized into two archetypes. One is the money you take, you can use for anything. Okay, not anything lah, whatever lah, your capex, opex lah, you want to go, I don't know, your boss want to buy a big party for everyone, or maybe give some big incentive, also can lah. I mean, no one's stopping you, right? So long as you have the financial metrics to prove that you can pay back. So that's a classical loan, okay? That's called a use of proceeds loan. Where the funds is directly linked to a purpose, okay? And then there are also other kinds of, one step back. So that is a general purpose loan, okay? So far so good, I hope I didn't confuse you. That general purpose loan, you can tack on some KPIs around sustainability, all right? So if those are called sustainability linked loans, where actually the use of proceeds is not really tracked, but what you pay for the loan, the percentage interest rate, right? That one moves about based on your sustainability performance. So is that clear? That's what we call sustainability linked instrument or sustainability linked financing. Okay. The other archetype of loans are very clear use of proceeds, where the money you take from the financer, you must use it for a green. You must use it for a transition defined project. Okay. So when we come up with taxonomies or frameworks, right? Your framework should cover, as a financer, both kind of loans. How you define where are the different key performance indicators in the case of a sustainability linked construct, or what are the transition projects that you deem transition. Okay, so in both cases, you have to define very clearly. So for example, on the top right, that is a use of proceeds definition for transition financing in the Singapore taxonomy. In the bottom right, it is a sustainability linked definition of transition. Okay, so these are all very well spelled out and aligned to the international standards. Okay, whether ICMA or LMA, those are more leading governing organizations that define broader finance instruments around sustainability. But the key thing is, if we look at the application of this taxonomy, right, whether it's sustainability linked or use of proceeds, right, you can see in the case of the left box that green, yellow, red idea comes back in from a use of proceeds. So very clearly, if your money is going to solar, it's green. If your money is going to enhancing the energy efficiency, okay? If the taxonomy, right, that guidebook says that in your sector, this initiative is eligible, then you can call it a transition loan or transition aligned loan. Yeah. So hopefully that's clear, right? If you're using it, the taxonomy as a KPI reference, you can also use that. So you can also link, let's say, your capex, your full capex, right? How much of that capex or opex or even your revenue is attributed to sustainability, right? Those ratios can also be turned into a KPI of sorts for sustainability linked loans. So again, the good thing is the taxonomy gives all these very granular numbers and metrics for you to plug and use it. Okay. Okay, so these are all very conceptual. I think just want to explain real life examples. So it's still fairly nascent. I would say maybe only 1 in 10 sustainably linked or sustainable or green financing is transition. Maybe even less. Yeah. So it's very new. As you know, all the taxonomies just came out, right? So the how and the actual usage is still in the nascent phase, but it should likely scale up very quickly. Yeah. And one example is in Japan. In fact, 2 examples, one of which we help ERM on the left. We help Nippon Life, so I think they are classically a life insurance company, but they also have come up with a taxonomy or a transition financing framework which spells out their own definition of their understanding of what is transition financing based on that same green, amber, and red kind of classification. Right. Another approach could be to look at, again, another bank, in this case SMBC, and this is public. They have then limit their transition finance definition to only certain sectors that are very important for them. Probably these are the biggest clients of theirs in these sectors. And again, in each sector, they spell out the activity that constitutes what is transition finance. So just to give you some example, if you are a steel manufacturer, if you're using the standard blast furnace to create a manufacture of steel, they will say, okay, instead of using conventional, you can use things like electric arc furnace, which is less carbon intensive. Okay, and you have, but however, this must be used up to 2030 only, and then you have, you need to prove that you're reducing 25% of emissions through that usage of the electric furnace. Okay, I mean, what's closer to home would be your cars, your automobile. So you see in the transition finance framework as of today, they allow for hybrid, like HEV. Okay, or if you are helping the ecosystem, if you are a battery manufacturer, most of your CapEx, OpEx are helping the battery sector for automobiles. You can also qualify to be deemed as a transition aligned, or you can take a transition loan when you go to the SMBC, for instance. Okay. Yeah. Closer to home, there are also two examples from a leading bank, OCBC. One of which is a property, a real estate transition loan. So again, these are all very good, clear use of proceeds loans, whereby the money that OCBC lends, right, to the borrower is directly going to a transition activity. Okay, a transition defined activity. So in the case of the left one, which is a Hong Kong listed REIT, I believe, the money had to be used to perhaps build or improve the facilities or certain initiatives that help a certain real estate infrastructure become more green. Okay, it's very clear. In the second case, it's a steel manufacturer. So I think in this one, the money that OCBC is giving to Green East Steel is going to help them to invest in blast furnace or more efficient electric blast furnaces, for example, or electric arc furnaces. Okay, so these are again rare examples. And I'm sure there are 1 or 2 already in the making or already out in Malaysia as well. Yeah. Okay, the final one I want to talk about is, in addition to traditional sustainable finance, which covers the loans, bonds, and in that segment we have identified green and now transition products. Carbon credits is another type of financing through the use of carbon credits, right, to provide revenue for projects to become economically feasible. And in that space, there's also a growing or upcoming initiative. So carbon credits may also have a role to play in transition financing, not in the sense of a classical loan, but in the sense of creating additional revenue to incentivize that transition. So hopefully that concept is clear. And I just elaborate more with an example. One is the coal-fired power plants. As we know, in Asia, a lot of our coal-fired plants are fairly young, right? You know, we're looking at maybe 20, 30 years old versus like maybe in Europe could be 50, 60 years old and it's time to retire them, right? So there's still actually sufficient economic value in keeping these coal-fired power plants in our region. However, we know that they are hard to abate sector. We know that they are carbon intensive, right? So when we talk about transition, clearly these guys are going to be red very soon, right? Maybe 2035, maybe 2040. So how then do we help? Should we just shut down all the coal-fired power plants? We can't, because at the policy level, again, that we're talking about security, we're talking about access. So there's a very dicey topic, but yet carbon credits can come in a sense to say that now for a coal-fired power plant, the economic value of shortening its lifespan we know roughly what is that, whether it's 5 years shortening or 10 years shortening, right? Because you can just net present value the anticipated cash flows. Why don't we transfer that loss of revenue or the negative net present value into a carbon credit structure where then participants will need to get to net zero or need to mitigate their scope 3 or scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. They need to get to net zero. They need to buy credits, right? They can buy these related credits. The name is called traction, okay? You can Google all this. So essentially you're paying to help someone to retire faster as a polluter. Do you get the concept? Right? Just like how you might be paying to protect a forest, or you are paying to grow a forest. You're paying to come up with a removal technology like carbon capture. So in a sense, these are also very interesting financial instruments that could help the transition journey. Yeah. So I think just one thing is to just keep a lookout for this segment. There might be more interesting carbon credit structures that could help the transition as well, in addition to classical sustainable finance. Okay, I think with that, we're right on the dot. I'll stop and happy to take any questions. Yeah, these are all on the MAS website, but a lot of the references, a lot of good case studies also, including the OCBC deals in the taxonomy guidance. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for you all to stay for 2 hours of your time. I think today we covered a lot about the concept of transition finance. We talked a little bit on the technology and some example about the work we do with our clients, some examples. And also, sorry, and Andy came in to talk about the financing, right? And also, I think we are seeing more and more product, because it's still quite a relatively new topic, transition finance, but we are seeing the pickup will be getting more. And also, I think there are more creative ways to look at how the market will gradually help to transition faster, right? And always have a role to play here, right? And I probably want to pause here. I'm mindful that we are 2 hours on the dot, but if there are any burning questions, we are more than happy to address. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, please. Are you going to ask about nuclear?
Yes. Thank you for sharing with us the interesting information that has been shared by all the 3 speakers. I'm particularly interested when you mentioned about the cement and steel, where the bankers will then identify what are the options they can take in order to reduce carbon. So I'd just like to share, in the carbon nuclear sector, they also have nuclear power as one of the sources for decarbonization of these hard-to-abate areas. So maybe you can bring back to the banks to also include that as part of the option for the companies. Secondly, I'd like to draw upon the statement made about green bonds, because in the nuclear power sector in 2021, in Canada, Ontario Power Generation was the first utility that had included nuclear power in the green bonds. And in terms of country, Canada was the first one to include nuclear power in the green bonds. So as we know in ASEAN, there are many governments have already announced they're going for nuclear because of climate change. So I think it's very urgent that the ASEAN taxonomy follow the European Union taxonomy to include nuclear, as well as for the green bonds, especially maybe Petronas or Tenaga that is looking to go for nuclear, should also include nuclear power in the green bonds. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment. I think maybe I just want to leave a 3R. When I talk about the decarbonization journey, right, I actually see from a 3R perspective. The first, I call it I know there are some people say even like don't use it, but I would say the reduce, right? Those are all the low-hanging fruit, right? Energy efficiency is given, right? We should actually do more, right? And also circularity, right? What Edmund mentioned about circularity, right? We use less raw materials, use more circular products, right? These are the first R. The second R is actually on what we call the replace, right? That is where we come in like fossil fuel, right, to renewables, right? And I think, but having said that, also I think it's a not easy dilemma, right? Because we are talking about the energy. I came from oil and gas sectors previously in my past life, But it's still very important, right? You look at the oil and gas, right? It's still like you look at the energy trilemma, right? We want clean, but we also want to have it at affordability. We also want it to have abundance and security of supply, right? We need to have that, balance that triangle, the energy triangle. I mean, those are real things that we have to look through, right, over the years. But in terms of like, in terms of the second thing, transition from fossil fuel to renewables, I would personally, this is not YARAM stance. I mean, this is my personal SK stand. I see nuclear as a role to play, for sure, right? For sure, right? And also the third and fourth generation nuclear power is safer and smaller, right? And I'm sure like a lot of TNB and others are actually evaluating that as well as one of the options, right? It's the challenge is of how to keep it safe, operate safely, right? So there's a second R. Also like that, also like what Edmund also mentioned about like, in terms of like cement, right? I mean, and also like, Andy also mentioned about like how we actually electrified some of the processes, right? Right, so those are the second. I think the third R, last time we called offset, but now I would say it's a more trendy word, we actually see remove lah, remove, right? There's the two ways practically to remove. One is actually the technology way, right? This way CCS, direct air capture, the different technology way of removing carbon, but also the nature-based solution, right? And also Malaysia and also the Southeast Asia country have a lot of opportunity to supply that more, right? So these are the three R, no? In terms of the whole journey I see forward, right? And I say, any other question first, before I close? Happy to take one more. I don't want to hold you back too long for lunch, but if there's any burning question, we are more than happy to address. Any takers? If not, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for staying attention. Thank you.